Well, what a week it's been, hasn't it? Thank you so much. So thankful that you guys have hung in and made it to tonight. I think it's going to be a good year for us. I'm encouraged by the strength of this gathering, by the men and women that I've met this week. It just gives. I was telling Mr. Moy, or he was talking to me about all the people that he met. I said, "Yeah, we've got a really deep bench, don't we?" So thank you all for everything that you do. Tonight's very special to me because my best friend is here tonight, and I just want to briefly introduce to you and have her wave to you all, my wife, Michelle. So, she is the better part of us. Honey, who knew 31 years ago when we got in that canoe together that where it would take us, the crazy places that we've been. And I want to thank you for being in the front, seeing what I can't see, and trusting me to say paddle left, paddle right. And it's been quite a journey, and I can tell you that I took a quick peek behind us, and there's a bunch of canoes back there. So I'm next to the Lord. I'm so thankful for you and the price that you've paid for us to get this far downstream. So thank you. I'm really glad you came tonight. Thank you. Okay. I can't tell you that's the last time I'm going to cry tonight. I want to talk about the value of a shared life. And what came to mind for me was something the Apostle Paul said in his first letter to the Thessalonians. And it's a simple verse, and it's easily overlooked if you're not paying attention. It's the second chapter, the 8th verse. He says, "Because we loved you so much, we are delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our very lives as well." Let me say that again. Because we loved you so much, we are delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our very lives as well. We think, what the heck could be as important as sharing the gospel? And Paul says, well, apparently it's sharing our very lives as well. But I don't think Paul was talking about the type of life sharing that we see in abundance today, posts and tweets and likes and comments. We have contacts and connections and numbers that we really weren't built to manage. When you think about it, there's never in the history has each individual been connected with so many people, managing all those connections. So we now routinely stay connected with people we've only briefly met, maybe never met at all, or people from high school and college and previous jobs and previous cities and previous churches, places that we've lived, places that we've been. From this event, your friends list will grow. We know where they vacation. On our screens, we've seen the inside of their homes. We know if their dog got into the garbage again. We know what they had for breakfast. We know too often and perhaps too well their opinion on just about everything. We have an abundance of these connections. And you have to wonder at what cost do we manage all these connections? We have no-fault divorces, we have a transient job culture, sexual intimacy with no commitment, casual relationship with our sexual identity. We emotionally engage and disengage so often that, like duct tape, we lose our sticking power because we so easily connect and release over and over and over again, to the point that there's no glue left for the critical bonds that make for generational and eternal change. I'm convinced that in our culture, there's a shortage of true life sharing at the level that Paul was talking about. There's a shallowness that's crept into the way all of our relationships work, because we're informed about others way beyond our obedience to pray for them, or even our ability or willingness to act in service to them. Did you follow that? Our overstimulating, fast-paced, rudderless culture makes every intersection seem shallow. An abundance of relationships that are transactional, fragile, not given over to either loyalty, depth, or permanence. But at the same time, there's still this deep desire to connect. We talked about it this morning in the panel. Somehow, there's still this deep desire to connect. Boys particularly need those critical connections. And what we're seeing is that they're attempting to fill that need for those critical connections in so many ways by reaching for these shallow opportunities to connect. Having someone meaningfully share their lives with us is important to us as social creatures. It's part of our nature. God created us for fellowship. It was not good for man to be alone, as somebody quoted earlier this week. There's a generational transfer that goes beyond devotions, lectures, and leadership lessons, even beyond conventions, campouts, high adventure in the outdoors. We're building characters in sons, giving away pieces of our lives by the way we live and by the way we share our very lives as well. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this time together. I pray that my words tonight will be yours, God, and that these people will be touched by what it is that you have to say to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Before we had kids, Michelle and I were therapeutic foster parents. One of our first foster kids was Jason. He came to us when he was 11 years old from a family of 6. And it was terrible, unthinkable abuse in the family that you would think would shut down any desire that he would have to share anything with those people. But I remember one night I went to minister at a youth detention center, and Michelle was home with Jason. And as she was putting him to bed, Jason, aware of where I was, he knew that I was at the youth detention center. He called it the Detention Center. He knew that I was at the Detention Center. And he asked Michelle, he says, "Can we pray for my sister, Judy?" And I think it was the first time he had really made reference at all to any of his brothers and sisters. We knew the story, of course. We knew he had all these brothers and sisters, but he was strangely disconnected and just very present with us. But this whole other world, you can imagine, because of what it was like, you would think, okay, he's separated from that. There's no desire to go back or live there or even think about that. But the fact that I was at the youth detention center brought something back, and he said, "Can I pray for Judy?" And apparently Judy was in the youth detention center regularly, I guess, and so he thought, he's there, and I'm thinking about Judy. Through the complexities of the foster care system, they were separated. And somehow Jason ended up really separated from a lot of most of his brothers and sisters. But Judy was the only one that he had no idea where she was. The case workers didn't report on her to him, and I was never there present when he asked these questions. You would think it's a reasonable question, but for some reason he didn't know where Judy was. And so even at that level, with that background that you can't imagine being part of, there was still this desire to find that connection. At the same time that he's building a connection, attempting to build a connection as best as he can to get some life sharing going on with Michelle and I, he's wondering about those connections from the past, desperately needing to know if that other connection could ever happen again. That's how critical these things are. That's how important they are to even overshadow this incredible past that you would think he was delivered from, there was still this desperation to find that connection again. Do you think God would be interested in making that type of connection for Jason? Tonight, I want to highlight 2 strategies for you to both model and pass on to the men in your charge. And then, if I have enough time and you guys have enough energy, I'd like to stray a bit from the subject and speak to you as a leader in a contrary culture. So my goal is to equip you with these strategies that position you to improve the depth of the relationships with the boys in your charge, and also to equip you to stand in a culture that's losing its way. We've got to be willing to open our lives, as Paul said, share my very life as well. We've got to willing to open our lives to be used by God in the big kingdom business of sharing our very lives as well. It's as if God, the ultimate sharer, is saying, give me your body, I'll give you my spirit, and then we'll have ourselves a Christian. That sharing at that level, our trusting Him with what it is He's calling us to. Wherever you're serving in your troop, in your community, in your family, there's an exchange there, a sharing of His very best with you, who are His very best. And the collaboration of those coming together is the most valuable, the thing of the greatest price that walks on this planet. So the first strategy is mainly for the men. I would say to challenge yourself and your men with this. Every man, with or without children, can serve as a dad or a dad-like. There's a great need for boys to be raised in the presence of men. And there's a great shortage of men willing to be there. So many boys without dads that all men, every man, should be enlisted as a dad or a dad-like. We've talked about this important scripture a couple times this week. A few people have made reference. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I think it was Dennis Rainey last night who gave us that definition of the orphan. Was it Dennis? Who talked about it as being in some country where it's recognized that orphan is just a child in a single-parent household. Or was it you, Danny? Okay. It's harder and harder for dads and dad-likes to connect to boys because the ground that they share is less and less common. In the panel this morning, we talked of the difficulties of meeting with boys where they are. Somebody asked that question: how do I connect with my son in Fortnite? How do I connect with my son online? I don't understand that world that he's in. How am I going to connect with him there? That common ground is lessons. In the olden days, a boy was raised and he went out and he worked in the fields with his father, and they shared that experience and they shared that work that they were doing, and things were passed on. And there was a great respect for the father because he had more experience in that area, and the son looked up to him and hoped one day to be able to turn a wrench as good as he did, or plow a field as good as he did, or tame a horse, or whatever he was doing. That son could look up to that father. And that common ground is missing, so it's a lot more difficult to do today. And because of our failure to fully engage with them in the way that they need, boys in our culture today, I refer to them as like canaries in the coal mine. And they are feeling the effects of a noxious culture, and they're paying the price first. And only dads and dad-likes can save them. There is no other plan. It's the most critical time for men in ministry to men. You've seen and heard the statistics for boys. It's particularly bad. Boys are 2 times more likely to be placed in special education, 3 times more likely to be ADHD. The suicide rates for boys are just soaring. Boys are behind girls in every single academic category. In 1969, 60% of the young people going to college were men and 40% were women. 40 years later, 60% were women, 40% were men, and they have now projected out a date where they think there will be no men going to college. Look at what they're faced with. Generational definitions and roles are uprooted. It's never before been as complicated, as challenging, as overwhelming. Depression is taking boys' lives in record numbers. I'm humbled as I'm understanding the level of influence that is represented in the leaders of men in this room. You know, a troop master in Texas, I think I shared this in workshop. I was visiting out there, and he pointed to a boy in his troop. He said, "You see that boy over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "He doesn't have a father at home." And I said, "Okay." He said, "See that man over there?" "Yeah." I've connected the two of them so that that man makes sure that boy has what he needs, that he has his handbook, that he has his uniform, that if you're going on a camping trip, he has his equipment, he's packed properly, has a ride, has everything he needs to get to that trip, because he understands that single mom has her hands full, and that boy needs somebody to look out for him. And then he said, "Now see that boy over there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, he doesn't have a father at home either. But that man over there is connected to him." And he went on and said the same thing. Went through about 3 or 4 of these. And I asked him, my first question was, "Who are you?" And he said, "When I was 9 years old, my father passed away. And I was embraced by a boys' organization and surrounded by men who made sure that I had what I needed. And now I'm committed to do it for as many boys as I can." I thought, wow, that's powerful. It was a different generation when it happened to him, and there wasn't so much fatherlessness. But in this generation, what a challenge we have before us. But listen, nobody else is doing this to the extent that we're doing this. And the outdoors is the place where the dad or the dad-like can again be the guy who knows more than the kid. Because you can Google how to start a fire with wet leaves, but until you've seen Kent Marks or one of those guys do it, it ain't going to happen for you. So we have a place with a level playing field. We offer that, where a boy can say, "Wow, look at Mr. Woody just tied a bowline with one hand." You ever seen him do that? It's amazing. I still got to do the rabbit through the hole stuff with most of the stuff. So I said to that man, I said, I was ashamed, but I thanked him. I affirmed him for the work he did and confirmed for him that that was worthwhile. Recognized the price he was paying to be a shepherd over the souls of those boys and to make sure that they were well taken care of. And as I stood there and affirmed about this difference that he was making, transferring generationally across a gap that would never be bridged without his intention and attention, he began to weep. I said, what's going on? And guys, my wife would have known instantly what's going on. I have to ask, what's up with that? And he said, it's been so long since someone spoke to me as a father, he said. I needed to hear that what I was doing was right. This big, brave man who led this troop and fathered so many was now a son himself. So it's not just these boys who need a father like somebody speaking into their lives. This is something we need to be doing for each other. I've had so many of you come up to me and say, well, your staff is just amazing, and they are. They'll stop and they'll talk to anybody and answer every question they can, and as busy as they are, they stop and they spend time, and one of them got down on their knees in front of my Woodlands Trail son, and his eyes lit up to see somebody at his level, and they talked to him and maybe exchanged a pin with him or gave him the trailman's handshake, and I'm thinking, that's so easy, and it's so powerful. Maybe you remember the story that I told the other night about hearing my dad preach. Walking in the back row of that church. Give me some head nods. Do you remember that story? This is my son in whom I am well pleased, was withheld until that day in the back of that church. But even with that, I still need it daily, minute by minute, straight from the throne, or one of my brothers, lest I become that guy who tries to earn it in 1,000 other different ways. This kind of life sharing can also be done by men who stand as a dad or a dad-like. It's not a habit that's going to be restored by anybody else. The media isn't suddenly going to pick up this campaign. Hey, be a great dad. Go embrace a boy. Help a boy. No, that's not what we're getting. Celebrities aren't going to take this on. It's a generation of men who've lost sight of what life sharing can be and the power of that mentorship. There's a synapse. That's a Danny word. There's a space. There's an essential link that's designed to bring about generational growth. And it can only be filled by a dad or a dad-like. I'd venture to say that any legitimate call to manhood must include a call to be a dad, with or without natural sons. A piece of this strategy is you've got to model for and challenge your men to look for the prodigal, the wayward, steeped in sin. I'd never suggest that you embrace the unrighteousness or say the sin is okay, but Jesus showed us that there's a way to embrace the unrighteous. We're all broken. Surprise. We're just broken in different ways. And when we recognize what we have been delivered from, we become much more able to participate in the Father's desire to deliver others. We were delivered to lead others to deliverance. We were set free to set others free. We were loved to love others. We were saved to share the message of salvation. We were fathered to go father others. Every man a dad. What if the hidden secret, one of the many that we uncover as we go along? Some people say, wow, that's really smart that you guys did that. And I'm like, we didn't do that. That's a God thing. We're just not that smart. We uncover these things, but what if we discover that another one of those hidden objectives, those things that God has hidden in Trail Life USA to be uncovered by us as we are faithful to his leading, what if it's that there's a remnant of men who flood the culture with a type of care, mentorship, call to greatness, and assurance of maleness that comes only through one who stands in the place of a father? What if that's what he's calling us to do? Don't you think that could be one of the most powerful things that could happen in this country, in this world, that a group of men decide that they're going to embrace that role of being the father to the fatherless and embracing these boys who in record numbers don't have the type of influence that they desperately need? One of our first TLTs was in Virginia in 2014, 15, I can't remember when we 2014, the first summer. That was crazy. What were we thinking? we took the whole staff on the road for that first summer in the midst of starting this whole thing and visited, I think, 7 different cities. And a mom in Virginia, they had a fire afterwards, a campfire, and I was standing around the fire with the men just kind of basking in this type of fellowship that we're experiencing here. And a woman came up to me and said, I have to tell you something. She said, I'm so thankful for this program. I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, 10 years ago, my husband died and left me with a 2-year-old son. And I've been crying out to him for men to mentor my son. And here I am with my son, who's now 12 years old, a navigator, she named the troop, and he's surrounded by godly men who are answering my prayer. And my husband would want me to thank you. Is that powerful? Now, I just got to hear that one. I wonder how many times that's being multiplied in our organization, where men are understanding, where they're hearing the call of God, where their heart is moved, and they're recognizing the influence that you can have on a generation and multiple generations. My wife told one of the men, or probably more than one, my wife is an amazing encourager. If you talk with her, you always walk away feeling better about yourself. She's amazing. She's sincere. She doesn't make this stuff up. She sees things that, I can say this because I have a degree in marriage and family therapy, so I'm going to say this as a professional. Women are smarter than men. You can clap. Now, men are more decisive, but women are smarter than men. So when you put that pairing together, and they're working together the way that God's designed it to be, then you got all the smarts, and then you have eventually a decision made. Because if you have somebody who's just smart enough to look at all the options over and over and over again, somebody at some point has to say, oh, okay, now. It's a beautiful design. Whenever I say that, someone invariably will come after the meeting and says, I heard what you said about women being smarter than men, but, I need to tell you I'm the exception to that. And I always want to say, your wife is so smart that you think the specific masculine interactions that affirm and define who we are and who our sons are to be are within our grasp. This isn't a fantasy. It's too late to say it's impossible because it's already happening. The question is, are we going to continue in it? Are we going to commit ourselves to be intentional about it? And really what it comes down to, my wife's been saying this to me too. She says, it's not that people don't have time for things. It's just that they haven't set it as a priority. Like, wow. It's amazing how people can get done what they want to get done. She's smarter than me. Strategy number 2, model and teach your men skills that allow them to share their lives, to cross that divide. This isn't rocket science. This is stuff that's doable too. And we talked about this, skills like eye contact, physical touch, focused attention. That's gold, particularly with boys, but it also is with each other. I told you on the first night that I'm the hugger. Even though Rob Green tried to accost me, take me to the mat. But with particularly the woodlands trailmen, that eye contact is so critical. I've done this before. When you see that guy with the fox, the hawk, the mountain lion loops on his shoulder, you drop to one knee. You stick your hand out, take hold of him with a nice, firm trailman's handshake. Sometimes you need to adjust his hand, and you need to squeeze his hand on there to show him that you're there. There's some power in what it is that you're doing there together, this grip. You're joining with him and showing him something physically. You're meeting him eyeball to eyeball so that little 5-year-old doesn't have to live in this world of everybody who's up there somewhere. Eye to eye. Physical touch. Focused attention. Do you know how rare that is for kids today? There's little bits and pieces that they get dropped on them. And because we're so busy, because we haven't set them as a priority, we hand them an iPad so that we don't have to. Trailmen, adopt that habit. Meet those Woodlands trailmen at their level. Listen to what it is that they have to say. Talk to them about who it is that they're going to be. Call them up to higher things. Tell them that the fox is the most craziest animal in the world, man. They are fast. Those hawks can fly through there. They can see things that nobody else can see. They can fly so high that we look like little ants. And that mountain lion, he stands up on that mountain. Sometimes he just lets out a roar and he lets everybody know, hey, I have arrived. You don't think that's going to build up? This is easy, but it's huge. The impact that we can do just by taking that minute to do it, because he's not getting it anywhere else, I promise you. And some of those boys, without that, they're definitely not getting it anywhere else. When they get older, they'll get it from a gang. They'll get some sort of recognition about who it is that they are and what it is that they're capable of doing. They'll be told clearly who's in charge, what their mission is, what they're capable of doing. Somebody will believe in them and send them on some missions that they didn't think that they could do. And they're going to accomplish them. They're going to feel better about themselves and come back for the next mission. We need to get as good at the gangs at raising young men as they are. It falls to us and the men we touch. Men who also need eye contact, physical touch, focused attention. My wife has worked with me a lot on this. Because when I was in business and when I was in ministry, I knew how to work a room. But I lost the moment because I was looking for the next interaction. And she has taught me to be present in the present. And she still has to remind me, and I need that reminding. And she'll say, you talked to him, but you weren't really looking at him. He was telling you a story, but it didn't look like you were. I heard every word, honey, but it didn't look like you were listening. I heard, well, who cares about you? It's him that you're hosting that conversation. We need it for each other. So the Woodlands Trailmen, we drop to one knee. The navigators, you've got to be the host of every conversation with those navigators. Ask questions, listen more than you talk. If your communication with them consists of you telling them what you think, you're losing them. Particularly at that age. They're not interested in what it is that you have to say. Not until you hear what it is that they have to say. Then they're ready. For adventurers, you've got to hear their perspective. They're testing their theories. They're coming into we have the knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Woodlands Trail is knowledge, navigators is understanding, adventurers begin to see the development of wisdom. They're testing some of these theories. They're testing thoughts that they didn't either memorize or had explained to them. They're testing thoughts that they are coming up with on their own by putting pieces together, perhaps in ways that are a little bit awkward or unusual, but the only way they can test those things is by talking about them. And so when they say something that we don't agree with, if we shut it down immediately, you've shut them down for good. For adventurers, if you disagree, make sure the bridge you've built is strong enough to carry your opinion. Did you get that concept? Danny, I love the cities thing. I'm stealing that. I like that. Anybody on that one where he talked about the cities and then the city will build, I'm picturing it's a dirt road and then it becomes more traveled and it's a single lane, double lane, and then it becomes a super highways. We begin to make these connections and build these connections. I thought, wow, man, what a great image. But I think of them as bridges, and you can steal bridges from me. If you're going to carry something heavy over a bridge, you better make sure the bridge can handle it, especially with adventurers. Listen, we pride ourselves on being right. But you can be as right can be. But that doesn't mean it needs to be said right now. Not unless the bridge is strong. If he's got an awkward idea that you don't agree with, that isn't going to, he'll figure it out. Don't let him get hurt. But this is one of the consequences of social media. Everyone has a bullhorn and an opinion. But there aren't any real bridges in that world. So we break bridges and stay perpetually mad at each other because we haven't earned the right to say to somebody the thing that we're thinking, but we feel like we can because it's the truth. And we've brought that into our personal interactions where we just go telling everybody the truth. But we don't have the bridges to carry that heavy stuff across. For adventurers, that's particularly helpful. Make sure you've got the bridge. There's nothing wrong with being right, but being right isn't enough. You have to recognize the long-term prospect of life sharing as more valuable than the short-term demonstration of our brilliance. I love that sentence. I'm going to say it again. We must recognize the long-term prospect of life sharing as being more valuable than the short-term demonstration of our brilliance. You're building a bridge with that adventurer. Take your time with it. He'll have time to learn. He's probably way ahead of where you were at that age. Don't you find that with trailmen? The end game is a restoration of biblical boyhood and manhood through a dad-son type dynamic that can turn boys and dads into godly men. Teach your men to connect. It's a vanishing art. You with me? That was not very... Warren's with it. Can I give you these other two points? I'm going to go. Those are my first 2 points. Can I give you these points about living in this culture? It's a couple points for leadership in a contrary culture. Is that okay? Let me change gears. It's a word to leaders. Standing here in front of a room full of leaders, I don't want to pass up this opportunity to drop a couple things. It's humbling, and I'm offering this not as a rebuke, but as a reminder and affirmation of something that God's undoubtedly already spoken to your heart. So I've got 2 things. Number 1, trailmen, we will be hindered until we give up on the idea that the popular culture will celebrate what we are doing. Accept that if you're committed in these contrary times, history may not be kind to you for the wonderful things you're doing just because you love people and are obedient to the Lord. I first learned this in 2014. Ron Orr will remember this. An AP reporter visited a troop in Texas with a photographer. They were interviewing them about the dynamic growth of Trail Life USA in that community. It was formerly a Boy Scout troop that had been around for a very long time, and it became a Trail Life troop, and they wanted to interview the leaders of that troop. Sent an AP reporter and a photographer. Well, that troop for 50 years, I think, had a tradition of singing at the end of their song, at the end of their meetings, they would sing the song Taps. And I didn't know there's words to that song Taps. And it's about the setting sun. And to demonstrate that, they would start with a hand up and they would sing the song and the sun would set. And when they finished the song, their hands were all at their side. They would be in a circle. And when they were through singing that, their hands would be at their side. And that was their tradition. They bonded around that. That's what you did in that troop. I hope you have traditions in your troop. I think Woody talked about those in a workshop. That was their tradition. Done it for 50 years or something. Well, the AP reporter was there and the photographer. They took thousands of photos. But the one photo that they chose to go out on the AP line to the entire country was a picture of the boys singing that song at the point where their hands were right here. And the caption under the photo said, "The Trail Life Scouts confess their creed and do their salute." Well, we don't have a creed, and that sure isn't our salute. But out of the thousands of photos, they chose that one. And I realized that I wasn't going to be universally loved. That was my introduction to this. And it's taken me some time, but I think that I've accepted this, and I call you to accept it as a leader in an organization that's countercultural, that if you're doing Christianity right, it's much more likely that you'll be burned in the town square than have them build a statue of you there. The good news is that even though it may seem to be at a severe disadvantage, truth wins. In the end, your sanctified convictions win. It just may not be in the way that you'll recognize. And you can't fight your battle in the way you see others fight theirs. Increasingly, we use our words to adjust the public perception of us and to defend any misconceptions or assaults on our character or motives. We think that if people will only understand us, they'll like us. And with enough words, we can make it so. So we rant and defend and explain and fight back. But unfortunately, if you fight fire with fire, fire still wins. So remember that when Jesus was accused, he said nothing. So why do we think we can do with our words what he did with his silence? Remember, the critic thinks himself brave, although his only weapon is hindsight. It's easy to criticize something after it's happened. The leader's strength, your strength, is courage, because you have to act before you know the outcome. And we have to act on an outcome that's in that marvelous book that we live by. We know the ending. We know that truth wins. And courage is acting in accordance with that truth, understanding that it wins. Don't lower your status by engaging unjust criticism. Against your critics, he is your defense. Be the better man. One more word for leaders. Embrace the risk that comes along with a mission that's bigger than you are by being willing to live out on the edge of your faith. I've had the blessing of ministering on 5 continents and working with over 400 denominations in both first and world countries. And I realize that here in the United States, we can live our lives 99% faith-free. If we get sick, we go see a doctor. If we get fired, we file unemployment. If we overcommit our finances, we declare bankruptcy. We don't particularly like our spouse today, we get a divorce. This mission that we do together, it's not a quick fix. And it's bigger than what you, in your own strength, can accomplish. It takes faith. It's not for the weak. It takes conviction to live in a space out on the edge of your faith. So get comfortable beyond believing that the ultimate purpose of your life is to be comfortable and secure. Because if you are going to remain convicted in the way that we are as an organization, it may not be comfortable. And you're going to have to live on the edge of your faith. And it may not feel so secure. But if what we're doing can be done within our own strength, we have to wonder if it's worth doing. If we could actually do in our own strength, what it is that we've accomplished as an organization in the last 5 or 6 years, if we could actually do that, you have to say, we did this. We didn't need God. But together we've done something that we're told over and over again shouldn't have been able to have been done. So I think it's worth it because we live beyond our faith. We counted on strength and ability and interaction with a God who can do more than we can do. You know, it's not so much anymore, but for the first 3 years I woke up every night hugging God tighter because I knew that I knew that it was at the edge, perhaps beyond the edge of what I was qualified to do, that I was being called to do. Anyone else here brave enough to admit that you wonder about your own qualifications to carry out what you feel you've been called to do? Anyone else? Okay, a few of us. Okay, good. I'm in the right room. It's a terrifying place. If you're doing it right, it's also beautiful. Because that's where you hug God tighter. At the place where you say, God, I can't do this. He says, I know. But hang on, I can. We got this. Stay close to me. We'll get through this. At the beginning of our organization, many of you there in 2013 when we rolled out Richard Matthews, who was the first-round draft choice. 11 years general counsel with Boy Scouts of America. And Rob Green, 20-something years with Boy Scouts of America. And me. And that was the executive team. And we used to joke about, we would say, you know, Richard Matthews was the attorney. And so we say, well, Richard's the brakes. You know, he's going to make sure we don't go too fast. He's going to keep those brakes applied to make sure we don't get, we don't miss it, we don't wreck this thing. And Rob, God bless him if you know him, Rob is the gas. He's all out, go for it. And they also had this wonderful thing because Richard was in the national office, BSA, and Rob was in a council office. They already had a dynamic between national and councils that they had to deal with all the time. Thankfully, we don't have in our organization those kind of dynamics. We really work well together with our folks in the field. So we had the gas and the brakes, and I thought, well, how do I fit into this thing? It's like, well, you're the steering wheel. I said, that's nice. So in the meetings, we would be talking about whatever topic it was, and there were thousands. And Richard would tell us why we shouldn't, and Rob would tell us why we should, and we'd go back and forth. And I just got to sit there and listen. You know, Richard was in Texas, Rob was in South Carolina, I was in Florida. We're all just on Skype, I think we used it at that time. And I just get to watch one, and I get to watch the other, watch one, watch the other, and just listen to these two brilliant men with incredible points and insight. And then they would turn to me and they say, well, okay, what do we do? And I got to steer it. And both men, wonderful, extremely men of very high character, men of God. And they would say, okay, you're right. You'd never know that there was a difference of opinion. And I thought, this is pretty cool, God. You know, this whole steering wheel thing. I kind of like being in the steering wheel. In Florida, we have Publix shopping centers. Everybody familiar with Publix? I don't know if they have these in anywhere, but the Publix near our house had, that's where we would take the boys shopping. They had the shopping carts with the little steering wheels in them. So you put your son in the shopping carts and he gets to steer. And I walked into Publix one day and the Lord said to me, that's you. He said, you think you're steering this thing. I was out on the edge of my faith beyond what it was capable I was doing, but he was faithful. He had my back. I'm only settled in knowing that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So if I'm not endeavoring to operate beyond my own abilities to accomplish what he's called me to, perhaps I'm nowhere near what he saw in me or for me. I'm paraphrasing Mark Batterson. He says, at the end of our lives, our greatest regrets will be the God-ordained doors we didn't open, the God-given passions we didn't pursue, and the God-sized dreams we didn't dare to believe. That's powerful. You know, I started off telling you about our first foster son, Jason, and the prayer the night that I went to the youth detention center. In that season, Michelle and I were taking teams into our local youth detention center to speak with, minister to young people who had been incarcerated. The night that Michelle stayed home with Jason, I met about 8 folks at the center, and it was an odd night. From the moment we walked in, you could sense there was something going on. There were the guards behind the counter, behind the glass, who would meet us and let us in because it was a regular thing. They knew what we were there for, but they weren't at ease. There was something that had riled them up. And we walked in, and it's almost like, oh, they weren't expecting us. And they talked back and forth, and they said, listen, we're having some real problems today with the kids. And normally they would bring all the kids into the chapel, what they call the chapel, and we would speak to them all together. They said, we can't bring the kids in the chapel. We have a lot of kids in isolated rooms. Apparently they had had some sort of a riot. So we got a lot of the kids locked up, and they're not allowed out. We do have a few kids that we can let you see. But we can't put them in the same room, so we've got a small room over here for boys, a small room over here for girls. So if you all still want to stay and minister to them, you can. I looked to the team real quickly, got all thumbs up. I said, yeah, that's good. So who's going where? There were 8 of us real quickly. We just decided 5 of us went to the boys' side, and 3 of us went to the girls' side, and I was amongst one of the 3 that went to the girls' side. And we walked into this room. It closed the door behind us. Then the other door opened, and in walked 3 girls. And they said, sit down at a table, everyone at their own table. And the girls shuffled in, and they sat at 3 different tables. And there's the 3 of us. And so I said, well, there's 3 of us, and there's 3 of them. Why don't we each choose a table to sit at? And I gave them the rules, because normally we didn't interact one-on-one. I said, you can't ask them what their names are. You can't ask them what they're in here for. You can't ask them any personal information about where they live or whether they have that expectation of privacy. But let's sit down, ask them if we can pray for them, if there's anything that we can pray for them about. So we each sat down at a table, and I sat down from across this brown-haired girl, and you can get the picture, her head down, dark hair hiding her face, and just intense, just kind of chipping nail polish off her fingernail. I said a few things to her, didn't get much of a response, didn't get much of a reaction. And finally I said, well, is there anything that I can pray with you about? And she said, I don't pray to God anymore. I don't believe that he's ever answered a prayer for me. And I said, well, what if he did? What would you pray for? And she said, I'd like to know that Jason is okay. So I said, Judy? And her head snapped up. I said, Jason's in my house. Jason lives with me and my wife, and he's safe, and he's happy. Do you think God cares about the connections that we make. At that same moment, my wife is at Jason's bed. I'd like to know if Judy's okay. Do you think he cares about these connections we have with people and how important it is beyond the likes and the comments and the shares and the surfacey kind of stuff we do? To care about those two kids, to say, yeah, you guys, this is important what it is that you're doing. You know, we like to pray for God to send angels. But maybe he's sending you. Trailmen, what we've been called to do together is big kingdom business. I want to close this entire week by paraphrasing from the book of Malachi and Luke. If there was an overarching scripture, I think Michelle and I didn't talk about this, but if there was an overarching scripture for all of trail life, you're in agreement with me on what that would be, honey? I think this is the one that she and I would choose. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Trailmen are the best men I know. Let's make ready a people. Thank you.